two of them right next to each other, and we think that's indicative of the dual camera coming on the bigger phone. So on the back, not one camera, but two cameras, so they both fire at the same time. They merge the picture, and the picture becomes much higher resolution. So that's going to be a big upgrade there, and we think that's pointing towards that.
And of course, I mean, the 7 is alluding to the fact that it is the iPhone 7. It's a sort of fairly basic joke there on Apple's part. On the watch perspective, I know earlier this year, both of our reporting we were expecting perhaps there to be a phone with cellular connectivity. How's that looking now?
Right, so we reported a few weeks ago that Apple had considered coming out with a version of the Apple Watch this year with a cellular data chip to be able to make phone calls, browse the web, text messages, Siri, while leaving your phone behind. But in fact, Apple ran into battery life troubles around June of this year, so instead, this year's model will only include GPS, no cellular for the time being.
Now, that seems, of course, to affect the ability of the watch to do more intelligent things in terms of healthcare. So that might be something which comes in the years to come, perhaps. Do you think that ultimately, what's the ultimate game plan looking a couple of years down the line?
Apple's ultimate game plan is to be able to release an Apple Watch that never needs to be connected to a phone. Just like you can buy a phone and never need to connect it to your Mac these days, or an iPad with the same deal, or even an iPod Touch, Apple wants the Apple Watch to be able to be purchased, put on the wrist, charged, but never connected to any other device. So we'll see if they're eventually able to reach that point, but I think they will once the cellular data chips and the battery life balance out correctly.
And of course, as with any new hardware release, there tends to be at Apple some software upgrades as well. We saw some elements of iOS 10 at the Worldwide Developers Conference back in June. What more can we anticipate come next week?
Right, so for the first time in a long time, Apple's going to be releasing 4 new operating systems around the fall between September and October. That's going to be macOS Sierra, which is the new Mac operating system that brings Siri to laptops and desktops. tvOS 2, which brings new features to the Apple TV, such as a single sign-on mode and a dark mode. iOS 10 for the iPhone and the iPad, which brings new, richer notifications, some interface improvements, and a brand new messaging app. And then watchOS 3, which brings some new health features, a new breathing app, a new heart rate app, and a few other emergency services to the Apple Watch.
I think that's given us pretty decent oversight of the kind of superficial or the first things we're going to encounter. Please, as we said, do feel free to send us your questions. We'd love to engage with you and see what your thoughts are. The difference is perhaps with this phone that perhaps the expectations are a little bit lower than the blockbuster upgrades we've seen in the past. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree that expectations for this year's iPhone 7 are a bit muted because the design is said to look fairly similar to that of the iPhone 6 from 2014 and the 6S from last year in 2015. A lot of people expect a brand new redesign every 2 years, and that's simply not going to be the case this year. The only design changes are going to be the lack of a headphone jack in favor of headphones that plug into the charger, as well as wireless headphones that are likely to be called AirPods. And they're going to be removing the 2 innermost antenna lines, so it's a little bit of a cleaner design on the back. And we're sure to see at least one new color, perhaps a glossy black color like they have on the Mac Pro.
One thing I'm wondering with the perhaps slower refresh rates in terms of the ability of the new phone, do you think that Apple is responding to slower upgrade rates in the smartphone universe, or is it just a question of their innovation pace is slowing down? There's simply less technology that you can cram into this sort of device.
Well, I think the latter is mostly true at this point. I think we're at a turning point in technology for smartphones, where next year, 2017, is when all sorts of new technologies like OLED, new health scanners, new screen technology, new button technology, new software technology is really going to take off. And keep in mind, Apple makes tens of millions of iPhones a month in order to meet their production and their supply-demand numbers. And so the technology has to be ready for Apple to put them out in big numbers. And I just don't think we're there yet with any major advances until next year.
I mean, actually something that sort of indicates that is a story that we wrote a few months ago with our colleague Ian King, who covers some of the chip makers, stating that the order are starting to ramp up already for OLED manufacturing equipment. So the machinery which is used to make those screens, they're seeing big orders now. then if you look at the amount of time it takes to turn around that sort of order and then bring it to a manufacturing line, that could take 9 months to a year, which points very heavily at next year's phone having an OLED screen.
Right.
What are the differences, though, that we're going to see on the sort of home button and things in this year's iPhone?
Sure. We reported that this year's home button is going to be a bit different. Right now, when you click the home button, it's a mechanical click. It's an actual button you're pressing. But similar to the latest MacBook trackpads, with the iPhone 7, when you click the home button, it'll feel like you're clicking it, but it's actually a vibrating sensation hitting back on your finger. So it's more so a virtual click. And the benefits of this is Apple could do some new cool software tricks to make the home button more functional, but it also means that there's less breakage opportunities, so these phones might last a bit longer, because the home button has historically been a big breaking point for the iPhone hardware.
One question that we've got coming in, and I'm not sure we do have any indication of this as yet, is about pricing.
Sure.
But maybe we can talk in general terms how prices tend to fluctuate from generation to generation.
Right. We haven't reported on the pricing yet of the new phones, but Apple typically likes to stick with an on-contract price starting of $199, so we'll see if they continue to do that. But now that carriers are sort of phasing out these 2-year contracts, Apple might play around with the pricing in order to make the phones more affordable, because right now they start at around $600, $650 for the higher-end models sans contract. Apple's also pushing their new subscription model for being able to buy a new phone every year, send in the old one. So I would assume they would talk more about that this year, given they're trying to hit a new subscription model to really accelerate revenues and profits going forward.
What's your take on the iPhone SE, which was the lower cost model introduced a little bit earlier this year? Some perhaps saw it as a way of maintaining demand or maintaining sales numbers in a slight dip in the product cycle. Do you think it achieved that?
I think the iPhone SE was more popular than expected. Certainly Apple employees tell us that the SE has beaten some internal expectations. So I think that's very important for them. I don't know if Apple's going to continue updating the SE. Apple's goal, as we reported in our story about Apple's iPhone plans for Japan, is to remove the bezels around the phone, remove the home button, remove the top and bottom. The thing about the SE is that it's a super small phone, and that's why people like it. That's the sales point. But if Apple's able to remove the bezels around the bigger iPhones and get the overall package in a smaller form factor, then the SE might not have a purpose of existing.
Do you think that these sort of flush designs they're coming up with, does that have any roll-on effect on cost, or is it perhaps creates more room for battery space? How does it affect the sort of internal? Do you have any idea how it might affect the internal architecture of these devices?
Sure. One of the points of the phone that uses the most battery power is the display. OLED is traditionally higher resolution, much crisper and clearer on the eyes, but it's also more energy efficient. So in order for Apple to make the phone smaller, they'll need to make the battery slightly smaller. In order to do that without sacrificing battery performance, they'll need more efficient parts.
And I suppose also the crucial thing is with the OLED is that it doesn't need a backlight. So that fundamentally allows the screen to be a lot thinner,
Exactly.
potentially creating more room for battery or allowing the phone itself just to become
Exactly.
thinner.
And they're going to find that balance whenever that hits.
Yeah. We've got some wag on Facebook asking whether the new phone will include a tax, well, he calls it a tax dodging app. Let's maybe call it a tax optimization app. Nothing that Apple did was frankly illegal. But on a more serious note, how big a deal will the camera upgrade be? Is it really going to make photo quality noticeably better, do you think?
I think the camera upgrade on this new iPhone is going to be the central upgrade. Last year was the Force Touch 3D touch mechanism. The year before was the bigger screens. 1 year we had Touch ID, the fingerprint scanner, Siri, voice control, GPS and 3G in the iPhone 3G, the second generation. This year is going to be all about the camera in that same structure. I think that Apple so far has been going after point-and-shoot cameras. Now, I think at least with the bigger model, the Plus model with the 2 cameras, they're going to be going after high-end DSLR cameras. And when you combine that with Apple's software and the apps from the App Store, I think they have a big selling point there.
Because the understanding is that the cameras, it's not just going to be 2 color lenses, basically. They will perform slightly different functions.
Exactly.
And that, if you could dig into that a little bit and
Sure.
explain how it improves particularly photography under low light conditions.
So there's a lot of benefits of having 2 lenses. And to clarify, it's not taking and producing 2 separate pictures. The lenses both take pictures and they merge it into one photo instantly, so the user doesn't really notice that. There's a lot of benefits, like Alex said, low light photography. When you have 2 lenses, they both shoot with two different types of light, and they merge that together. So if you take a picture in a really dark room or in a dark party or something like that, the picture quality will be much better than what you might expect today from a current iPhone 6s camera in a low light environment. Another significant benefit is zoom. Right now, when you zoom in, when you want to take a picture, it looks a little pixelated, it looks a little blurry before you take that shot and even afterwards. But with the two cameras, it brings an improved focal length to the zooming technology to be able to zoom in and out at a faster rate with less blur and maintaining more of the quality from the original picture.
And I think possibly a key point to note here is that despite the fact there will be two cameras, this isn't necessarily a way of improving particularly augmented reality functions. And firstly, as Mark said, it'll be merging the same to create one image, not two separate ones. And secondly, the fact is that they're probably a bit too close together to be able to create any sort of depth perception, which would allow more advanced versions of Pokemon Go, but other ways to interact with your environment, perhaps enabling advertisers. So that's something that's not going to be in this edition.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we're there yet on the augmented reality software, but it's to be seen. Maybe an app developer will be able to leverage the two cameras if Apple opens it up to developers. So we'll see.
We have a question here about the extent of the watch's ability to take off in terms of sales in the way that the iPhone did. I mean, it seems to me that the lack of a cell connection doesn't just, or an LTE connection, isn't just a hurdle in preventing the user from being able to generate a lot of use from the device, but also it reduces its ability to be a sort of FDA-approved device if it ever went into the healthcare space and allowed, if there was someone having a heart attack and you could check the heart rate and that sort of thing. Apple can't sell it on that basis, which restricts it from particularly healthcare providers trying to force it onto their customers as a way of monitoring their health. I don't know, do you have a different perspective on it? Do you think there are other hurdles?
I think that cellular connectivity is the biggest hurdle because it's the biggest component of making the watch completely untethered from the phone. But of course, there's other ways to untether it. That includes GPS. So right now, with the current generation watch, if you want to go for a run, you basically need to have the phone strapped to your arm or in your pocket or somewhere in order for that GPS data to come through, since the watch itself doesn't have a GPS chip. Now this new version will have a GPS chip, so we're one step there. But Apple also needs to do improvements to the software, the Wi-Fi architecture, and of course, like Alex said, the cellular, in order to make it completely untethered.
One big market which has been hurting Apple a lot in recent months has been China. Now, the iPhone SE, as much as it might have surpassed some expectations, it had been pitched in some way as a way of attracting customers from developing economies. Now, I think we did a piece a few weeks ago which looked at the way that the competitors in China have been increasing their market share. And I think that the price point of the SE is a lot closer to these guys, but it's still a lot more expensive than them.
Right.
Now, I wonder whether you think that the new high-end models could help refresh rates in China, which maybe have been lagging.
Sure, I agree. I think the higher-end models will improve refresh rates, seeing we are at the end of the 2-year cycle now from people wanting to upgrade to the iPhone 6. The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus was massive for China in those Asian markets because bigger screen phones really took off there initially, and Apple sort of jumped on that bandwagon. And that was 2 years ago. We're coming to the end of the cycle, so I think we're going to see a lot of upgrades there. To your point about the iPhone SE's success, I don't think that fits the need for these Asian markets completely. People don't want a cheap, smaller phone. They want a less expensive, bigger phone. So until Apple's able to get there, I don't think they're going to hit the peak of their potential success in Asia.
Super. Well, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you everyone out there for joining us. We hope to see you again soon and perhaps make this a more regular thing. Do have a lovely evening, afternoon, or morning, depending on where you are.